In this video, we're going to look at the 2015 Pension Scheme Consultation, probably better known as the McCloud Sargent case, what it is, who it affects, and importantly, do you need to do anything? So, my name is Mark, I head up Condies Wealth, and I'll be taking you through today's presentation, and unfortunately my hair is that grey. Just a quick note on this disclaimer, the final McCloud Sargent rules have still got to go through Parliament, so there could be changes, and please don't take anything in this presentation as personal financial advice. You should always seek advice for your personal situation. So by way of background, back in 2015 a new section of the NHS pension was introduced. However, this didn't affect everybody. If you were older than 50 back in 2012, you were able to stay in the older 1995 section, which is arguably the better section because it allows you to retire at 60 penalty free. However, if you were younger than 50 back in 2012, you had to join the new scheme either straight away in 2015 or shortly thereafter. Now, the Fire Brigade Union and the judges took the government to court on the basis that the only deciding factor of which scheme you stayed in was age, and therefore they claimed this was age discrimination, and they won that court case. So importantly, the transitional rules for when you join the 2015 scheme have been found to be unlawful. However, a careful distinction here, it is just the transitional rules that have been found to be unlawful and not the actual scheme itself, and the scheme will continue. So who will these rules affect? Probably the vast majority of people who are listening to this video. Therefore, most people who joined the NHS Pension Scheme before 2012 and then transitioned to the 2015 scheme. If you did join the NHS pension after 2012, then basically these rules won't affect you because your entry to the 2015 scheme will stay the same. Also importantly, all GPs from 2022 will be in the 2015 scheme. Even those who used to be protected in the 1995 scheme will have to move to the 2015 scheme from April next year. So how does the government propose to fix the fact that the introduction of the 2015 scheme has been found to be unlawful? Basically, they're going to introduce something called the deferred choice underpin that at retirement allows you to decide what happens with your pensionable service between 2015 and 2022. Do you keep those 7 years in the newer 2015 scheme, or do you revert those 7 years back into your legacy scheme, which will for many be the 1995 section, although for some it might be the 2008 section. Because you make this choice at retirement, it allows you to make an informed decision. Are you retiring at 60, or are you retiring closer to 67, 68? It's also good news because for many it's going to allow you to access more of your pension at an earlier age without penalty. However, although I think many people will revert their service those 7 years back to their old legacy scheme for wanting more pension at an earlier age penalty free, it won't suit everybody. The 2015 scheme, although it's seen as the inferior scheme because of its later retirement age, it does have the benefit that each year you're in the 2015 scheme, you are accruing more pension. So that means if you do plan to retire closer to your state pension age, you probably will be better staying in the 2015 scheme. And if you're planning to retire closer to 60, you'll be better having the money reverted back into the old scheme. But as I've said, because you need to make this decision at retirement, you can make this decision at the point where you know what age you are when you retire. So you're not going to have to make any decisions just now of which scheme you're going to choose. However, there are implications for annual allowance which are going to happen sooner. Basically, over the last 7 years, your annual allowance growth will likely be based on growth over two schemes, which will have given you a higher annual allowance input. The SPPA in about October 2023 are going to assume that the service over the 7 years is reverted back into your legacy scheme, and therefore the pension growth will no longer for those 7 years be based on dual scheme growth. It will be based on single scheme growth. And as I've already touched on, actually the 2015 scheme has a slightly higher accrual rate, which again will give you more growth. So when the SPPA look at this in 2023, for many it's likely that your growth for annual allowance pay purposes is going to be less, because it's going to be in a single scheme and a scheme with a slightly lower accrual rate. This therefore is also an advantage of the McCloud Sargent court case. Now, if you have overpaid tax, you're going to be allowed to look back over the last 7 years and you'll basically get a refund for any overpaid annual allowance charges that you've paid, or if you've used the scheme pays option, you'll be allowed to revise these submissions downwards. However, there may be occasions, I think these will be seldom, but there may be occasion where you've underpaid tax. If that is the case, you only have to go back 4 years, so not the full period back to 2015. You can just look back over the previous 4 years, but you will have to pay any underpaid tax. That'll either be via your tax return, or you'll be able to apply for scheme pays and use that option. Are there any annual allowance implications at retirement? Well, under the deferred choice underpin, if you decide to keep your service back in the old scheme, there'll be no implication because this will already have been looked at in 2023. However, when you reach retirement, if you then decide to put those 7 years back into the 2015 scheme, that could give rise to a substantial annual allowance tax bill. Importantly though, the government have said that that tax bill will not be paid by the member and will have to be picked up by the scheme. So I thought a worked example might be useful. So we're looking here at a GP with pensionable income of about 100,000, and their pension statement back in April 2015 showed that they had a pension of about 40,000 per annum. So the left hand table here assumes that they just stayed in the old 1995 scheme and shows the pension growing, but also looks at their annual allowance pension inputs. The table on the right assumes that they moved to the 2015 scheme back in 2015, and it shows their pension growing in both schemes and the pension inputs. And as you'll see in every case, the pension input of just being in a single scheme is a lot less, especially in April 16, where just staying in one scheme gave an input of 19,000, and on the right hand side you had an input of 30,000. So in this case that GP would have had a lot more unused allowance to carry forward. But even in the sort of greater year of say April 18, you're looking at a smaller input of 56,000 versus 60,000. So in this example, this member would be able to maybe avoid some charges or certainly revise their scheme pays submission downwards. So as already stated, this really should be good news for many doctors. This slide also illustrates another point, which is if you look at the pension back in April 20 on the left, it's showing you've accrued a pension of 54,000. However, on the right, it's showing that you've accrued a pension in the 1995 scheme of 46,600 and in the 2015 scheme 9,900. Now, if you combine those two together, that's going to give you a pension of 56,500. So that 56,500 is greater than 54,000 on the left. But this is the point about being able to retire without penalties, because would you rather have a pension of 54,000 that was accessible at 60 penalty free, or a slightly greater pension, say 56,000 odds, but early retirement penalties have to be added? So again, it's just reinforcing the point that many people will choose to have their service reverted back to the legacy scheme. So lastly, within the rules, there is also something called contingent decisions. And this is to allow people to review decisions they've made in the past. So a good example of this is maybe somebody who opted out of the 2015 scheme because they didn't like the fact that they'd been moved to that scheme and they were going to suffer higher annual allowance charges. Now, had they known that the scheme was going to be found unlawful and they could have stayed in the 1995 scheme up to 2022, they maybe would have made a different decision and never left the scheme. So under these rules, it is going to allow the pension scheme administrators to look at these and potentially put people back into the scheme. It's very important though that if you are in that boat and if you are going to be looked to put your service back in, you are going to have to make up those contributions for the 7 years and also any annual allowance implications. So I think at this stage we're going to have to wait for further guidance for this set of rules, because I think it's going to be very complicated. It's also going to affect your tax returns for those 7 years. So yeah, this part is very much wait and see. So hopefully you found this presentation useful. As I said right at the beginning, these set of rules have still got to go through Parliament, so there could still be changes, and you know, given your specific circumstances, the rules could affect you differently. So always take specific advice to your situation. And with this in mind, if you do have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with us at Condies Wealth. Thank you very much.